I'm going to reminisce with you and tell you things that you didn't know that happened in the 7 years that we shot over 150 Dukes of Hazzard episodes.
For years, fans of the Dukes of Hazzard believed the cast shared the same Southern charm and brotherly bond behind the scenes as they did in front of the camera. But one beloved actor drew a line he would never cross again. James Best, known for his unforgettable role as Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane, made a decision so final, so personal, that it shocked even those closest to the show. And now, the truth about what really happened is finally coming to light. To millions of viewers, James Best was the heartbeat of the Dukes of Hazzard. As Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane, he was goofy, unpredictable, and endlessly quotable. His signature catchphrases and exaggerated mannerisms became staples of the show's charm. Whether he was chasing the Duke boys in another doomed patrol car or scheming with Boss Hogg in the town square, Roscoe brought energy and warmth to every scene. But behind the comedic mask, the man who played him was far more serious. James Best was no ordinary television actor. Before donning the Hazzard County badge, he had already built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable character actors. Over the years, he appeared in more than 600 television shows and dozens of films. He had trained under the legendary Lee Strasberg, starred alongside James Stewart in Winchester 73, and held his own with Paul Newman in The Left-Handed Gun. He was also a respected acting teacher, mentoring future stars like Quentin Tarantino and Gary Busey. In short, Best knew the industry inside and out, so when he joined the Dukes of Hazzard, he did not come just to play a silly sheriff. He brought decades of experience, professionalism, and a deep respect for the craft. While others may have viewed the show as a fun paycheck, Best approached it with intention. He shaped Roscoe into something unique, someone kids could laugh at, but also love. That mix of absurdity and heart was no accident. Best rewrote dialogue, improvised gags, and constantly pushed for stronger material. He poured himself into the role. Most of the cast and crew respected that passion. Catherine Bach, who played Daisy Duke, often praised Best for his mentorship. Denver Pyle, who portrayed Uncle Jesse, was another seasoned actor who shared Best's old-school values. On set, there was laughter, yes, but also a clear understanding that Best demanded a certain level of discipline. Unfortunately, not everyone met that standard. As the series grew more popular, tensions began to bubble beneath the surface. Fame was changing people, egos clashed. And for a man like James Best, who had spent decades perfecting his art, there was one castmate whose behavior he simply could not tolerate. It would not just be a disagreement, it would be a breaking point, one that changed his relationship with the show forever. When you picture the Dukes of Hazzard, what comes to mind is bright sunlight, roaring V8 engines, and the mischievous Duke boys evading capture. But behind that polished facade lay an undercurrent of tension, one that ran deeper than any gravel road in Hazzard County. On-screen camaraderie concealed off-screen disagreements, and as the show's popularity surged, so did the friction. From its premiere, the series was a runaway hit. Ratings soared, merchandise lined store shelves, and fans clamored for more. But for James Best, Roscoe's slapstick sheriff, sudden fame didn't come with blind enthusiasm. He was an old-school, Lee Strasberg-trained actor from a pre-glamour era. His working method was serious, disciplined, even quiet in its intensity. This approach sometimes clashed with others, especially as the younger cast started treating scenes like improv stages or photo ops. Production moved fast. Lines were often shifted at the last minute. Scenes were rescheduled, and pressure mounted to deliver more stunts, more action, more comedy. To many, it was thrilling. To Best, it sometimes felt careless, like artistry was being sacrificed for spectacle. Among the persistent complaints, missed cues, half-baked rehearsals, ego-fueled improvisation, one day he'd discover they skipped the entire blocking rehearsal. Another time, cameras rolled while a key castmate still reviewed his lines, leaving crew members scrambling to hold ready markers. It wasn't laziness, exactly. It was a different mindset, a relaxed approach to professionalism that grated against Best's trained instincts. And it wasn't just idle frustration. Some cast members seemed to thrive on the chaos. They viewed late starts like part of the atmosphere, or worse, a sign of their star power. It wasn't long before Best's quiet disapproval became visible. An elegant eyebrow raised, a tense silence on set. It created a sort of professional fault line, splitting those rooted in respect from those more cavalier. To his credit, Best never openly scolded or snapped. He didn't walk onto set shouting. Instead, he'd get strangely distant. A pause here, a muted expression there. Behind his eyes was a storm, every indication that he felt the show's integrity was slipping. Cast and crew noticed, some worried about it, some shrugged it off, but none could ignore it. While the public saw punchy one-liners and high speeds, the off-camera world was sometimes quieter, sometimes more fraught. Best had no intention of making waves. He simply refused to let distractions interfere with his work. He was respectful, punctual, and fiercely protective of his craft. In the backstage shadows, tensions simmered. Friendships felt the pull. Jokes felt sharper. And then there was one person who became the focal point of Best's growing concern. It wasn't just a personality clash. It was a crack in what had been marketed as idyllic, family-friendly unity. Every series morphs over time, but few change as visibly as the Dukes of Hazzard did when the laughter began to mask something different. In that space between takes, you could almost feel a fracture. 4 seasons in, and behind the scenes, things weren't exactly Roscoe P. Coltrane-level lighthearted. By the time the Dukes of Hazzard reached its 4th season, the lines between the actors' on-screen personas and their real personalities were beginning to blur, and not in a good way. The charm that had once defined the set was wearing thin for James Best. Beneath the surface of all the country humor and fast car chases, something personal was festering. It was not sudden. It was slow, creeping, and corrosive, and one day it boiled over. Best had tolerated a lot. He was known for his discipline and patience, but both have limits. While he was careful never to call out fellow cast members publicly, those who worked on set noticed the shift. Something had changed in the way he carried himself. The frustration he once brushed off now sat just beneath the surface, visible in his posture, his expressions, even in how he delivered lines that once brought him so much joy. It all came to a head during what should have been a routine filming day. The cast was working on a scene that required coordination and timing, one that Best had prepared for in his usual way. Lines memorized, marks rehearsed, timing perfected. But one of his co-stars was late. Not just late to the call sheet, but unprepared when they arrived. No lines ready, no energy, no apology. Best's face reportedly froze in disbelief. At first, he tried to keep things professional. A quiet conversation in the corner, out of earshot. But it did not stay quiet for long. According to one crew member, the tone changed quickly. Voices rose, not into yelling, but something more cutting, cold, pointed words. A confrontation, plain and simple. While exact quotes were never published, those present said the disagreement became deeply personal. Best, who had dedicated his life to the craft, felt his professionalism was being mocked. What might have seemed like harmless joking to one person felt like an insult to everything Best stood for. To him, it was not just about lines or tardiness, it was about respect. That day, Best did something almost no one expected. He walked off set, not in a huff, not in anger. He simply put down his script, said nothing, and left. Production halted. The air was thick with shock. This was not a stunt. This was not a threat. It was a man drawing a boundary, and doing so with a finality that shook everyone watching. Producers tried smoothing things over behind closed doors. Phone calls were made, meetings held, but Best was resolute. He would return, but not under the same conditions, and certainly not with that castmate in the same room. The show adjusted. Scenes were rewritten, shoots were rescheduled, and while fans at home never noticed, the cast and crew did. From that moment on, there were quiet rules in place, a new normal, one that reflected the reality. James Best had made a decision. He would finish what he started, but never again beside the person who had crossed the line. For fans who adored the Dukes of Hazzard, the idea of tension among the cast felt almost impossible to believe. The show was built on the illusion of unity, of family. On screen, the characters teased, tussled, and laughed their way through every episode. Sheriff Roscoe might have bumbled around town, but he did it with a lovable twinkle in his eye. And Enos, Bo, Luke, Daisy, Uncle Jesse, they all felt like pieces of the same down-home puzzle. So when rumors quietly began circulating in the early 2000s that James Best had once refused to work with a co-star ever again, fans were stunned and confused. Who could possibly have drawn such a hard line from someone so deeply beloved? Naturally, speculation took hold. Some pointed to the Duke boys themselves, Tom Wopat and John Schneider. Both had famously feuded with producers over pay and creative control. Their temporary departure during the 5th season sparked headlines and a casting shakeup. Wopat, known for his rebellious streak, was rumored to be difficult at times. Schneider, though younger and more affable, was still learning the ropes of fame. Could either of them have stepped on Best's toes? Then there was Ben Jones, the actor behind Cooter Davenport. Jones had his own well-documented battles with production and walked away from the show for part of season 2. His politics, strong opinions, and outsider status made him another suspect in fan theories. Others speculated about Catherine Bach. She and Best rarely shared scenes, but some wondered whether off-screen drama had erupted during press tours or table reads. Yet those close to the production quickly dismissed that theory. Bach and Best had always been friendly. She even once called him a true professional and a joy to work with. Still others pointed fingers at Sonny Schroyer, who played Deputy Enos Strate. It seemed absurd. Roscoe and Enos were almost always paired together. They had what appeared to be real chemistry. Their scenes were filled with comedic banter, and their bond seemed genuine. Schroyer often referred to Best as his mentor. At conventions and interviews, they smiled for cameras and shared fond memories, but here is where the mystery deepened. Behind those smiles, something was missing. In rare moments, fans caught signs of stiffness, of distance. There were no heated words, no drama on stage, just silence. Controlled, polite, deliberate silence. And for years, no one knew what to make of it. As time passed and more cast members opened up in interviews, cracks began to form in the official narrative. A few crew members hinted at unspoken issues between Best and one cast member. A subtle pattern emerged in their scenes, always brief, rarely emotionally connected, sometimes stitched together from separate takes. Still, the answer remained elusive. It would take a few more years, a few more interviews, and a whole lot of fan persistence before the truth quietly emerged. And when it did, it wasn't dramatic. It was simple, painful, and perhaps the most human part of all this Southern legend. When the name finally emerged, it caught most fans off guard. Not because he was a villain, not because he was known for stirring trouble, but precisely because he wasn't. The co-star James Best had vowed never to work with again was none other than Sonny Schroyer, the actor behind the gentle, soft-spoken Deputy Enos. It defied everything fans thought they knew. After all, Roscoe and Enos were the show's most iconic law enforcement duo. Their scenes were filled with slapstick humor, call and response antics, and a brotherly rapport that viewers adored. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far more complicated. Accounts from the crew and close associates began to fill in the gaps. It wasn't one incident. It wasn't one insult. It was a slow unraveling of trust, an accumulation of small moments that eventually led to something Best simply could not ignore. Sources say the root of the problem was respect, or, in Best's eyes, a lack of it. At a time when Best was pouring himself into the role, reworking dialogue, refining his delivery, staying late to perfect his timing, Schroyer began showing signs of disengagement, late arrivals, a lack of preparation, a tendency to joke during rehearsals that Best felt undercut the tone. In one now legendary moment during a shoot, Schroyer made what was reportedly a mocking comment about Best's dedication to a scene that had already gone through multiple rewrites. Best didn't respond with anger, but according to those nearby, his face changed. The smile dropped, the conversation ended. Something in him quietly shut down. To others on set, it may have seemed like a minor disagreement, but for Best, it hit somewhere deeper. Schroyer's comment wasn't just careless. It felt dismissive of everything Best had worked for, everything he stood for as an actor. For a man raised on the old Hollywood system of discipline and deference, the moment marked a breaking point. In private, Best made it clear he would no longer share scenes with Schroyer. From that moment forward, directors were instructed to work around it. Most fans never noticed the subtle distance that grew between Roscoe and Enos on screen, but in the production notes, in the script revisions, in the blocking directions, it was there, quiet, deliberate, permanent. Years later, even after the show ended and reunion specials brought the cast together, the rift remained. At fan conventions, the two appeared on the same stages, but rarely interacted. In interviews, Schroyer continued to speak respectfully of Best, often calling him a mentor. Best, for his part, chose never to name names. He carried the burden quietly, honoring a principle that few ever saw, and even fewer understood. This was not a feud built on screaming matches or scandal. It was quieter than that, sadder. A bond broken by misalignment, by clashing values, and by a deep disappointment that could never be repaired. When the truth finally came to light, it did not feel like gossip. It felt like a window into the heart of a man who gave everything to his craft, and simply asked for the same in return. When the name finally surfaced, it surprised nearly everyone. Not because he had a reputation for drama, not because he was known to be difficult, but precisely because he seemed so harmless, even beloved. The castmate James Best quietly refused to work with again was Sonny Schroyer, Deputy Enos Strait himself. To most fans, it made no sense. On screen, Roscoe and Enos were inseparable. They finished each other's sentences, botched car chases together, and brought endless comic relief to Hazzard County. Their chemistry seemed effortless, their affection genuine. But behind those laughs, something was unraveling. For years, the details were kept quiet. Both actors appeared at conventions. They posed for group photos. They smiled for the fans. But when it came time to work, especially during the later seasons, their scenes together became rare. Less banter, fewer shared close-ups. Always one just off frame while the other delivered a line. And gradually, the truth began to trickle out. According to multiple crew members and cast insiders, the tension began with small things. Schroyer, still relatively new to Hollywood, had a lighter, more casual approach to acting. He joked around during rehearsals. He occasionally arrived late to blocking. And during takes, he sometimes riffed off script, a move Best saw as undermining the tone of the scene. Best, in contrast, approached every shoot with the seriousness of a stage performance. He marked his scripts, adjusted beats, and rehearsed movements until they were seamless. He had spent decades in film and television, training under the likes of Lee Strasberg and performing with Hollywood icons. He expected a certain level of preparation and, above all, respect. One day, during a scene Best had spent considerable time reworking, Schroyer reportedly made an offhand comment about not sweating the small stuff. It was meant as a joke, but Best didn't laugh. According to those nearby, he gave a tight nod, said nothing, and walked off set shortly after. That was the moment. From then on, Best made a firm decision. He would no longer share direct scenes with Schroyer. The production team, caught off guard, adapted quietly. Scripts were tweaked, blocking shifted. The show's editors stitched together sequences to give the illusion of unity. And for the most part, it worked. The viewers never saw the divide, but those who worked on the show saw it clearly. And over time, even the most loyal fans began to notice the subtle separation. Neither actor ever spoke openly about the rift. Schroyer continued to call Best a mentor in public. Best, for his part, avoided discussing the matter at all. When asked about his favorite castmates, he mentioned Denver Pyle, Sorrell Book, and Catherine Bach, but rarely, if ever, Sonny Schroyer. Their silence said more than words could. This was not a blowout, not a scandal. It was something much more personal. A quiet breach of trust, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. And in the world of James Best, a man defined by dignity, discipline, and deep respect for the craft, that meant everything. When James Best passed away in 2015 at the age of 88, tributes poured in from around the world. Fans remembered him not just as Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane, but as a beloved teacher, painter, father, and friend. Co-stars, students, and admirers all described him the same way: generous, talented, fiercely professional, and unforgettable. To this day, The Dukes of Hazzard remains one of television's most iconic series, and Roscoe remains one of its most enduring characters. But James Best's true legacy goes far beyond the patrol car and catchphrases. He was a man who valued respect, discipline, and artistry in an industry that often forgot them. He brought gravitas to a goofy role and made it his own. crafting a character that lived in the hearts of generations. The feud that shadowed his time on the show was never the focus of his story, but it was a part of it. And perhaps that is what makes his legacy all the more human. Best was not interested in airing grievances. He did not seek revenge or attention. He simply drew a boundary, held it with quiet conviction, and let his work speak for itself. For longtime fans, learning the truth behind the rift adds new layers to the show. It reminds us that even in a world built on fantasy and nostalgia, real emotions live behind the camera. Sometimes the people who make us laugh the most carry the heaviest burdens. In the end, the story of James Best is not one of bitterness. It is one of dignity. His ability to entertain never wavered. His impact, both on screen and off, continues to ripple through the world of acting and beyond. And the truth he carried with him